You noticed it a long time ago. At parties, you find a corner. At gatherings, you count the minutes. At dinner tables full of laughter, you smile, but something inside you is already somewhere else. People call it shyness. They call it arrogance. They call it being antisocial. But you know it isn't any of those things. It's something quieter, something harder to name. You don't hate people. You just find that most conversations leave you more empty than before they started. And the silence fills you in ways that no room full of people ever could. You've wondered if something is wrong with you. Nothing is. In fact, something might be very right. Watch a crowded room carefully, not the people laughing the loudest. Watch the ones near the edges, the ones standing by the window, drink in hand, not really listening to the conversation beside them. The one who arrived, greeted everyone warmly, and has been quietly drifting toward the exit ever since. The one who gives thoughtful answers to questions no one else seemed to notice were even being asked. These people are not broken. They are not sad. They are not waiting to be saved by the right conversation. They are simply operating on a different frequency. A frequency most people never tune into because the noise of constant social contact drowns it out completely. Here is what most people don't understand about the person standing at the edge of the room. They didn't drift there by accident. They chose it every single time. And there is a reason for that choice that goes deeper than personality, deeper than habit, deeper than introversion as a simple label. It goes all the way down to how certain minds are built and what those minds actually need to function at their highest level. For most of human history, solitude was not a luxury. It was dangerous. To be alone meant to be separated from the tribe. Separated from the tribe meant vulnerability. Vulnerability meant death. The human brain evolved to treat loneliness as a threat signal, a warning, an alarm buried deep in the nervous system that said, "Get back to the group. Get back now." And for most people, that alarm still rings loud and clear. But somewhere in the long, slow story of human civilization, something began to shift. The moment humans developed the capacity for abstract thought, for philosophy, for mathematics, for art, for science, solitude stopped being only a danger. It became something else entirely. It became the condition under which the deepest thinking became possible. Aristotle walked alone while he thought. Newton's most revolutionary ideas came during a plague, when he was forced into isolation at his family farm. Darwin spent years in quiet, methodical solitude before he said a single word about evolution. Nikola Tesla described his greatest moments of invention as occurring in states of complete aloneness, not despite the silence, but because of it. These were not antisocial men. They were men who understood something fundamental about how their minds worked. They understood that certain kinds of thinking cannot happen in a crowd. Here is what the research actually shows. In 2016, a study published in the British Journal of Psychology found something that surprised almost everyone who read it. For most people, social interaction increases life satisfaction and a sense of well-being. This is the expected result. Humans are social animals. But for individuals with higher cognitive ability, the relationship reversed. The more frequently they socialized, the lower their reported life satisfaction. The more time they spent alone, the better they felt. This isn't a small finding. It runs directly against everything we assume about happiness and human connection. But it makes sense once you understand what is actually happening inside a highly active mind. Think of your brain as a processing system. Every piece of incoming information requires resources, attention, energy, working memory. When you are in a social environment, your brain is not resting. It is working. It is reading faces, interpreting tone, monitoring for social cues, managing your own responses, anticipating reactions, adjusting your behavior in real time. For most people, this process runs quietly in the background. It doesn't cost much. But for a mind that processes everything more deeply, that notices the hesitation behind a word, the contradiction between what someone says and what their body does, the unspoken tension in a room, social environments are extraordinarily expensive. not emotionally, cognitively. Every conversation is a full computational event. And after enough of them, the system needs to shut down external input entirely, just to process what has already come in. This is not antisocial behavior. This is maintenance. This is the mind doing what it must do to keep functioning at the level it is capable of. Solitude, for these people, is not absence. It is not emptiness. It is not giving up on connection. It is where the real work happens. Now here is where it gets strange. Because if intelligent people genuinely function better in solitude, if the research supports this, if history confirms it, then why does society treat it as a problem to be fixed? Why do we ask the quiet child if they're okay? Why do we worry about the colleague who eats lunch alone? Why do we describe someone who prefers their own company as someone who needs to come out of their shell? The shell, in most cases, is not a cage. It is a laboratory. We have built a world that rewards extroversion, that equates visibility with value, that measures participation by volume, by how much you speak, how often you appear, how loudly you make yourself known. And in that world, the person who thinks deeply but speaks rarely gets overlooked, gets underestimated, gets quietly pushed to the edges of rooms they were never particularly interested in being at the center of anyway. But here is the paradox that most people never see. The ideas that change the world rarely come from the loudest person in the room. They come from the person who went home early, who sat with a question for weeks without telling anyone, who turned something over and over in their mind in the dark, in the quiet, in the alone, until it finally revealed itself. The world runs on noise, but it advances in silence. So what does this mean for you? If you have always felt the pull toward solitude, not as depression, not as fear, but as something that simply makes sense to your nervous system, then perhaps you have been measuring yourself against the wrong standard. Perhaps the question was never why you prefer to be alone. Perhaps the real question is what you are doing with that aloneness. Because solitude is only as valuable as what you bring back from it. The thinkers, the creators, the ones who changed something, they did not disappear into themselves permanently. They went in, did the work, and returned, with something to give. That is the quiet contract of the intelligent mind. You withdraw, not to escape the world, but to understand it well enough to eventually say something true about it. And in a world full of noise, that might be the most radical thing a person can do. Just be still and think.